back to the channel. Okay, so today we will take it a step further, all right, and then see what other things that we can also do within the GitLab, all right, CI/CD before we start, executing our project, all right, on the platform. Now, let's go back again to the pipeline editor right here. We already have our runner configured, and then we've tagged, all right, all our jobs to basically use that particular run, and we saw how fast, all right, the pipeline actually executed when we used our own runner, basically. Okay. Now, one thing I want to show us here is this. Now, in GitLab CI/CD, right now, when you create a new branch, for example, if I go to the code repo here, all right, and then I come here, for example, let's say I come to maybe that should be under code, all right. So if I come to code and I come here to branches, all right, and I click here on new branch. So let's click on new branch there. So let's say this branch is feature branch, and then I create the branch. Of course, when you're creating a branch, you're creating from an already existing branch, right? So you say create branch. Now let's see what that will do, okay, for us. Now, immediately I created a new branch. You can see that the pipeline got triggered, right? Now, so look at that. So the pipeline is triggered for that particular branch, all right? So for the feature branch, you can see it here. Now, we don't want that to happen, okay? So how can we actually correct that? I mean, if I go to my pipeline editor, for example, right? I just want to show us this. If I go to my pipeline editor, okay, and I just maybe, let's try something here. Okay, so let's see that maybe I just want to run, let's say I want to run a batch script, right? Or maybe I have some commands that I want to execute just for us to test out, a few things, okay? So I can come here, all right, and then let's say we just want to run some, shell commands like, pwd present working directory, all right? So these are commands, all right, shell commands basically, okay? And then I come here and I say mkdir, let's create a test data, okay? And then, we have all of that running. So under the after script, I'm going to just put a few stuff there. And then I'm going to basically say remove, rm-r. All right. So basically I want to remove the test data that I created, all right, before. Okay. So let's see. Okay. So I remove that and then I can do another one and say, all right, ls basically. Okay. Now, if I commit this, let's see what will happen. So if I commit this change, all right, so let's see what is going to happen with, the branches. Now, I committed a change into the main branch, not the feature branch, right? So the changes was committed into the main branch and not, all right, the feature branch. So let's click on the view pipeline and let's see what will happen, right? Now, the pipeline was executed for the main branch, right? You can see that, that was quite fast. That's like 11 seconds because, if you go to the run test, let's see what happens there. All right, so we can see that the mkdir actually was executed. All right, and then we can see here when we said, ls, so we saw the app folder that we created, and of course we removed that from here. And when we said ls here, we can see that we only have the app, all right, folder, but we made, a test data. All right, we didn't list that, so we deleted it also right here. Okay, so that ran really pretty fast. Okay, all right. Now let's go here to the jobs. Let's see what we have under jobs actually. Okay. All right. So now if you look at under the jobs, we can see that we have main here and we have feature, all right, here as well, right? The feature branch. So this was done right now. Now I committed something into the main branch, but of course it didn't trigger, it didn't trigger, what do you call it? It didn't trigger the feature branch, right? So if I come here and I click on the feature branch, all right, I will see that the feature branch was not, triggered when I committed something into the main branch, all right? This was done 3 minutes ago, right? And if we click here, okay, let's see. If you click there, all right, we can see all the make directory and all of that that we executed, right? But in some cases, you also want to be very careful so that when you are pushing anything, it doesn't, go into other branches, right? You want to be sure that what you're pushing is only executing in a particular branch. All right. So how do you do that? So if you go back to the pipeline editor, all right, you can execute some keywords as well. So let's say, for example, all right, so let's say, for example, I want to run my build image, okay, and my push image, I want to run it only on the main branch, right? That is the only place where I want the build image and the, all right, deploy image, or basically the deploy and the push image. Let's assume that those are the jobs that I want to run on my main, which means these other ones, the run tests can run on any of the branches, all right, but my build image should only execute on the main branch, and my push image should only execute, all right, on the my push image, my build image, my deploy image should only execute, all right, on the main branch, right? Which means any other branch should not run these jobs. Okay. So what keyword can we use right here? Now there's a keyword called only, all right? So only basically is, saying that, this thing should only run here. So I'm specifying here that this job should only run on the main branch. Now, one thing that I like about GitLab is that their keywords and the syntax are very relatable. All right, there are things that you can actually understand. I mean, only means just do this thing here. Okay, so here I'll say only, and then I'll say main. So for the push image as well, all right, I can also say only, all right, and then I will say, all right, main here. So basically, this should run only on the main branch. That's basically what we're saying. All right, so now I'll say main. Okay, so now if I commit these, of course, it's going to run, all right, all of these jobs. So let's commit the changes. Let's see what happens with that, and then let's view, all right, the pipeline. All right. Of course, the pipeline is going to run because this is the main branch, anyways. So it's going to run all of the jobs. Okay. But then let's see something. So let's allow this to finish. That was quite fast. So let's allow all of these things to run. And I just want to show us, all right, something. So I just want this to wrap up so that there won't be any conflict. So the job is done. Now, if I come back here, all right, to my repo, remember we have a feature branch, right? So if I come back to my repo and then I come back to code and then to branches, all right, so let's delete this branch, okay, and let's create a new branch, all right? So delete that branch and then click on new branch. So let's call this branch feature, right, again, okay? And let us create a branch. Of course, if I create the branch, automatically the pipeline will be triggered for this particular branch, right? So now let's click on this pipeline and let's see the jobs, all right, that is executing. Now look at that. Only one job executed, which is what? The run test. Because the only keyword has been, is specified in the pipeline script that only, all right, on the main branch should the build, the push, and the deploy image job run. So in our feature branch, only the run test branch or only the run test job actually will execute. Do you understand that now? Because in the pipeline script, you already specified, all right? So if you go to the pipeline editor here, we already specified that this run test job can run on, we didn't even put any only there, right? We just basically just left it, which means, this run test job will run on any branch, but then the build image, the push image, the deploy image should run only, all right, on the main branch. All right. So that is one way to basically, guard against, your job running on all the branches. Somebody can push something, all right, to any of your branches, and you don't want, your production branch basically to be triggered, right? So these are things that you can actually do, all right, to guard against, all right, such a thing. Now, apart from using the only, there's also more like a better way, all right, to do that. Because if you have like 10 jobs, you can't be putting the only here, all right? So there has to be a better way to actually configure this so that we don't have to specify, all of these only, for every job. So what can we do, all right, to manage that? You can have like 10 jobs that should run, and then you want those jobs to run specifically on a particular branch, right? So how do you do that without having to specify only, all right, for every of those jobs? So what can you do? So let's remove this only, all right? So remove all of that, and let's see what we can do to actually, basically just something like that is global, actually. Okay. Now, here, what we can do is basically what you call a workflow rules, all right, in GitLab CI/CD. You can actually configure a workflow rules, all right, and specify some kind of rule, just like the name suggests. Okay, you can specify some kind of rules, right? Now, one thing I wanted to know here is that when you come here to this documentation, there is what you call the predefined CI/CD variable reference. Okay, so here there are some variables that you can actually use in your pipeline, okay, that you can reference automatically without you defining them. So these are predefined variables, not user-defined variables. Okay, so if you scroll down here, you can see all of these variables. I mean, it's a lot, right? We can actually go through all of these variables. Okay, so we're going to be using some of this variable, all right, as we go on. For example, one of such variables that we're going to be using is the CI, all right, commit, variable. So the CI commit variable. So if you look at here, we have the CI commit branch variable. So it says the commit branch name available in the branch pipeline, including pipelines for the default branch not available in merge request pipelines and all of that. So we're going to be using this variable, all right, to define our workflow rule. So let's see how that can be done. Okay. So here, I'm going to go to my pipeline and then I'm going to create a workflow rule, right? So right here, I'm going to say workflow, all right, colon, don't forget your colon every time. And then I'm going to say rules, all right? So what's the rule? So I'm going to say if, all right? So if here should also have a colon. Remember, we're dealing with YAML, right? So every, keywords and things must, end with a colon, right? So I'm going to say if, so let's reference that variable. So if CI underscore commit, so we can actually copy it from here directly. So let's just copy the name here. So copy that, and then you come here. So we're going to say if this commit, all right, is not, okay, equal, all right, to main, okay, so we're going to use another keyword that is called when, okay, and then we'll say never, okay, and then we can put something here also, all right, and basically say, all right, when, and then we'll say what? Always. All right. Now, what does this mean basically? So the rule here basically says that if the commit branch is not main, which means if I didn't commit into the main branch, then the pipeline should not, all right, be triggered. Right? The pipeline should not what? Should not be triggered. That is what this means. Which means if I commit into any other branch that is not, all right, the main branch, okay, so it shouldn't be triggered. All right, is that what it says? So let's look at that again. So if the CI commit branch is not main, the rule says what? Never, which means do not trigger, all right, anything. And then when should this rule apply? The rule should apply always. That is what the next when here means. All right, so the rule should apply always. Okay, so which means it's not just a one-time thing, it's something that we want to execute, all right, every time. So the rule should apply every time, basically. Okay, so now if I come here, all right, so let's come here, for example, and let's do this. All right, so okay, so let's test this out, right? So I'm just trying to look at a few things here to be sure that we are good. All right, so let's commit the changes. Okay, now the pipeline is being triggered, all right, for this particular, all right, job. So if I come back here to my, to my repo, all right, so you can see that the pipeline is running. So if I go to my feature branch, let's see. All right, do we have any pipeline running? You can see that we don't have any pipeline, all right, that is running at of the moment. All right, so if I go back to build and I go to my pipelines, all right, I can see, all right, that my pipeline has completed just now, all right, in 11 seconds, and then that is done. Now, if I go back to my repo, okay, and then I come here to code and I click on branches, all right, so let's delete a branch again and let's create a new one. Let's see if the rule actually applies, right? Initially what we said was, we used only to basically specify the jobs that we want to execute only on the main branch, right? And then, of course, one particular job was still left that actually executed on the feature branch, okay? So let's create a new branch and let's see, all right, what will happen now. So we can just call this test, test workflow, all right? And so let's create a branch and let's see if any of the job will actually execute on this particular on this particular branch. Now you can look at that. No pipeline is running because the rule basically says if it is not main, right, then it should never execute. All right, so that is what we have here. Okay, so if you look at here, it says if it is not main, if the commit branch is not main, then the pipeline should not run. So that is why if you look at what you have here, the pipeline simply did not execute. Okay, because the rule says if it is not the main branch, if the commit, which means if it is not the main branch that we committed anything to, then the pipeline should not execute, all right, at all. And that is why you see here that the pipeline didn't execute, all right, at all, right? Because it is not, all right, the main branch. Okay, so that is how to specify, all right, that as well. Now, quickly, let's look at just one more thing that I want to share, all right, with us. Now, in GitLab CI/CD, of course, when you have a branch like this, which is expected in a work organization, right, in a company, you're going to have, different branches, and people are going to create what you call a merge request. Basically, they have done something and then they want to merge their changes, all right, maybe into the main branch, right? Now, in the GitLab CI/CD pipeline, you can also, all right, execute a build, all right, for your merge request as well. That is also very possible. Okay, so you are not executing, all right, your build for a branch, but for every merge request, all right, that is executed, or for every merge request that is created, you can also execute a build, all right, for the merge request. Basically, that is basically something that you would probably do, because for every merge request you want to test, all right, the code that the person is trying to merge into your repository to find out if everything is fine before it's finally merged and all of that, right? So you also want to do that. Okay, so now how do we go, all right, about the merge, all right, request? Basically, how do we just go about all of that? Now here I can come here, for example, to the build, and then I'll come to pipeline editor. And I can add another thing to this rule, basically, right? I can add another thing to the rule, basically. And then I'll say here, I'll say, these are the two rules that I want to evaluate. So I'll use this ampersand, all right, sign, basically to say there are two things that I want to execute. So if this and this is true, all right, this is more like your and, okay, conditions, right? So which means if this is true and this is true, then this should happen, all right? So I'm going to use another, all right, syntax, another variable from here, which is called CI pipeline source. All right, so here you can search for that also. All right, you can come here to the search bar here, and then I'll search for CI underscore pipeline. All right, so here I have the pipeline source. Okay, so you have this variable here called pipeline source. So you can copy that, all right, and then come here and then say that, all right, this is another source that you want to verify. So if the source is not also equal, all right, to, okay, merge underscore request, all right, underscore event. So which means if it is not a merge request event, all right, then this pipeline should not be triggered, which means, so what we are basically doing now is we are evaluating two conditions. So if it is not the main branch, and if the event is not a merge request event, all right, then this pipeline should not, all right, be triggered, which means, it has to be either of this, right? So if it's not a merge request, just don't bother. All right, if it's not the main branch, don't bother. Okay, but if it is any of these, then the pipeline should, all right, be triggered. So that is basically what we're trying to say here. So here I'm going to click on commit changes. All right, so let's see. Of course, we already know that this will run. Okay, but then so now I committed the changes inside of the test branch, right? That is what I did, right? Inside of the test branch. Okay, that is where I edited the pipeline. So I didn't go, all right, to the main branch. So let's see what will happen with this now. Okay, we committed inside of the test workflow branch. Okay, and that's a mistake basically. Okay, so here it's saying checking pipeline status, and you can see that is like taking forever. Okay, so if I click on the pipeline here, so let's see if there's any pipeline that is actually executing. So you can see that we don't have any pipeline executing because the rule clearly states that it has to be, all right, the main branch. Okay, so even though we are executing, all right, the pipeline inside, all right, of the test workflow, you can see that it's just there saying checking pipeline status, checking pipeline status. I mean, it's not going to run because, I mean, it's the wrong branch, okay? Based on the rule that we have set, this is not going to work, okay? So what we can do basically is that we can actually, all right, just, we can just leave it here, right? And then let's go and do this in the correct branch. Okay, so let's look at the main branch and let's see what we have right there. So in the main branch, all right, so you can see that in the main branch, that change is not actually there. All right, the change actually is inside of the test workflow branch. Okay, because the change was actually, all right, created in that branch. So let's create a merge request and let's see what happens. So I'm going to click on merge request. So basically, I'm merging from the test workflow into main. All right, so I'm just going to come here. I don't need to do anything. Basically, I'm just going to say create a merge request. All right, so a merge request has been created. And then look at that. Merge request pipeline is what is running. Okay, so that means the rule that we stated is actually, all right, being executed at the moment. All right, so now you can see that it says the merge request pipeline passed, all right, for this job just now. So if you click on that, all right, if you click on that pipeline, you can see that the related merge request and it says to merge, all right, test workflow. And you can see that basically this is what a merge request event. Okay, a merge request what event, and that is basically acting based on the rule that we have specified, all right, in the pipeline, that if it is not the main branch and if it is not a merge request event, then the pipeline should not, all right, be triggered. Okay, so if I go back here now to my main and I click here, all right, I can see that the merge request event, right, has triggered the pipeline. It has built, all right, the pipeline. It has successfully built it, but I can see that the changes is still not showing up in my main branch, right? Because I mean, the merge request has not been accepted just yet. Okay, but the mere fact that a merge request event occurred, right, that would trigger, all right, the pipeline. I mean, that is basically what we specified. Okay, so now if this, all right, is done correctly, then you can now say merge. Okay, and then the changes will now appear, all right, in your main branch. But because of the rule that was specified in the pipeline, we have said if it is a merge request event, so which means it does not matter whether it's a particular branch or it's not the main branch, but as far as it's a merge request event, right, then the pipeline will be triggered. Okay, so now if I'm okay with this pipeline build, which means, I mean, the job was built successfully and I'm fine with that, all right, then I can come here to say merge. All right, so basically I will basically merge the changes and everything is actually fine. Now you can see that immediately I click on merged. Okay, that is more like a commit inside of the main branch. Can you see that? That is what a commit inside of the main branch. The pipeline was triggered immediately. Do you see that now? The pipeline was what? Was triggered immediately. But when we committed into the test workflow branch, I mean, nothing happened. It was just rolling and rolling and rolling, and then nothing happened. But when we created a merge request event, right, the pipeline was triggered. When we merged into the main branch, which is more like a commit activity, all right, the pipeline was also triggered. Okay, so you can see, all right, how the workflow rule works in that regard. So now if I come here, all right, you can see that the merge is done and the pipeline has passed as well. So now if I come here to my, all right, main branch, and then I click inside of my this thing, I can see that the changes has actually now, all right, been merged into my, all right, main branch as well. Okay, so that is basically how to set your workflow rules. I mean, that is better than actually using the only, all right, keyword, basically. So with the workflow rules now, all right, we can just leave it as is, and then we can run our jobs, all right, as we go on in the course of this class. All right, so thank you so much. All right, in the next class, we're going to be looking at custom variables, and we're also going to be looking at global variables. All right, and then possibly we'll look at how to set up a runner, all right, to use the Docker, all right, executor instead of the shell executor. Okay, thank you so much for your time. I will see you, all right, in the next video.